The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. The famous 19th century cartoonist Thomas Nast, responsible for the donkey and elephant representations of our political parties, as well as for making Santa Claus small and fat where previously he had been depicted as tall and thin, was at a party one day. And the guests all thought it would be great fun if he could draw cartoons of them all. He agreed and made some quick sketches and then passed them around for everyone to see. There was a lot of laughing and joking, but then they noticed something very interesting. It seemed that everyone could recognize the others, but few of them recognized themselves. When it comes to self-recognition, many of us have a blind spot. We don't see ourselves as clearly as others see us. Our imagined self and true self differ. So we don't recognize. And this is especially true with the character flaws that we try so hard to hide. We think if we hide them from ourselves, then others won't be able to see them either. Well, Jesus' parables often function like a mirror, enabling us to see ourselves more clearly, especially in the context of our relationships. And today's parable is no exception. Luke tells us that Jesus has a particular audience in mind for this particular parable. Luke says he told it to those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and held others in contempt. Well, that's not us, right? We've come here this morning to already confess our sins and receive assurance of God's forgiveness. The very fact that we're here shows that we're not ones who trust in our own sense of righteousness, right? We don't badmouth Republicans for having stacked the Supreme Court with conservative justices and overturning Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision. We would never criticize Democrats for their liberal policies and awarding handouts to the undeserving or being soft on crime. This parable isn't directed at us, is it? Perhaps we need a parable like this one to help us see both others and our own selves with new light. But this parable's transformative power depends on us getting the portrayal of the characters right. It's so tempting just to jump right to the ending and Jesus' pronunciation of who's justified and then say to ourselves, okay, we should be more like the tax collector and not the Pharisee. Okay, I've got the point, Jesus. What's next? So let's back up for a moment. I invite you to think of people of faith that you admire. People who are generous in their financial support of the congregation and other ministries. Folks you admire of how they lead different ministries and worship regularly and encourage others to lead faithful, prayerful lives. Put all those characteristics together to form in your mind a kind of spiritual hero that you admire. Now consider a person who runs a chain of payday lending stores, who preys on the poor of the community, someone who's been caught embezzling money from their employer, or a traitor even stealing and selling secrets from their privileged position at the Pentagon. And then you got a little bit of what these two characters in this parable are like. The religious hero is the Pharisee. They were looked up to. They studied God's law. They kept it, encouraged others to keep it. They were the good, moral, religious ones. The cheating traitor is the tax collector, who colluded with the Roman occupation forces to collect taxes from the people, which included a steep cut for themselves. Now, who among us would aspire to being that despised tax collector? Won't we rather be admired as an outstanding model of religious dedication? I think it's only when we get these characterizations lined up correctly that this parable maintains its power to bring about its great reversal. It's only then it will get us looking deep within with honest eyes to examine who we really are. Before telling a story that became for him a metaphor for the inner spiritual journey, which I'll share with you in a moment, Parker Palmer first shared a quote from Annie Dillard. "In the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. But if you ride these monsters down, if you drop with them farther over the world's rim, you will find what our sciences cannot locate or name. The substrate, the ocean or matrix of ether, which buoys the rest, which gives goodness its power for good and evil its power for evil. It's the unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our life together here. This is given, it's not learned." I wonder if Jesus' parable might guide us into this deep space that Dillard speaks of. Can we make that journey inward to discover the best and worst of ourselves? Are we willing today to confront our inner angels and demons? It's been said that the people we have the hardest time relating to occurs in part because we see in them something that we don't like in ourselves. Our natural reaction when we encounter difficult people is to echo the words of today's Pharisee and thank God I'm not like them. We balk at the notion that maybe in some way we are. If you're anything like me, then you don't enter into this inner work very readily. I know, and I've learned through experience that it's helpful, but it's also hard and even at times scary. It can stir up unpleasant memories and emotions. But today's parable instructs me to take that heavy lid off the portal of my deep inner life and to go down and have a good look around. Parker Palmer's story about why one might want to take the inner journey can serve as a metaphor for us all. Here's how he tells his story. He says, "In my early 40s, I decided to go on the program called Outward Bound. I chose the week-long course at Hurricane Island off the coast of Maine. I should have known from that name that what was in store for me. Next time I'll sign up for a course at Happy Gardens or Pleasant Valley. Though it was a week of great teaching, deep community, and genuine growth, it was also a week of fear and loathing." He says, "In the middle of that week, I faced the challenge I feared most. One of our instructors backed me up to the edge of a cliff 110 feet above solid ground. He tied a very thin rope to my waist, a rope that looked ill-kept to me. It seemed to be starting to unravel, and he told me to start rappelling down that cliff." "Do what?" I said. "Just go," the instructor said, in typical Outward Bound fashion. So I went and immediately slammed into the ledge some 4 feet down from the edge of the cliff with a bone-jarring, brain-jarring force. The instructor looked down at me. I don't think you quite got it." "Right," I said, being in no position to disagree. "So what am I supposed to do?" The only way to do this, he said, is to lean back as far as you can. You have to get your body at right angles to the cliff so your weight will be on your feet. It's counterintuitive, but it's the only way that works. Well, I knew that he was wrong, of course. I knew the trick was to hug the mountain, to stay as close to the rock face as I could. So I tried it again my way and slammed into the next ledge another 4 feet down. You still don't have it, the instructor said helpfully. Okay, I said, well, tell me again, what am I supposed to do? Lean way back, he said, and take the next step. Well, the next step was a very big one, but I took it. And wonder of wonders, it worked. I leaned back into empty space, eyes fixed on the heavens in prayer, made tiny, tiny moves with my feet, and started descending down the rock face, gaining confidence with every step. I was about halfway down when the second instructor called up from below. Parker, I think you better stop and see what's just below your feet. Well, I lowered my eyes very slowly so as not to shift my weight and saw that I was approaching a deep hole in the face of the rock. In order to get down, I would have to get around that hole, which meant I could not maintain the straight line of descent I had started to get comfortable with. I would need to change course and swing myself around the hole, to the left or to the right. I knew for a certainty that attempting to do so would lead directly to my death. So I froze, paralyzed with fear. The second instructor let me hang there, trembling in silence for what seemed like a very long time. Finally, she shouted up these helpful words, "Parker, is anything wrong?" To this day, I do not know where my words came from, though I have 12 witnesses to the fact that I spoke them. In a high, squeaky voice, I said, "I don't want to talk about it." Then the second instructor said, "Well, it's time you learn the outward bound motto." Oh, keen, I thought. I'm about to die and she's going to give me a motto. But then she shouted 10 words I hope never to forget, words whose impact and meaning I can still feel. If you can't get out of it, get into it. I had long believed in the concept of the Word become flesh, but until that moment, I had not experienced it. My teacher spoke words so compelling that they bypassed my mind, went into my flesh, and animated my legs and feet. No helicopter was coming to rescue me. The instructor on the cliff could not pull me up with the rope. There was no parachute on my backpack to float me to the ground. There was no way out of my dilemma except to get into it. So my feet started to move, and in a few minutes, I made it safely down. Why would anyone want to embark on the daunting inner journey about which Annie Dillard writes? Because there is no way out of one's inner life, so one had better get into it. On the inward and downward spiritual journey, the only way out is in and through. Today, our doorway to this journey inward is this parable, which helps us to see that our categories of good and bad may not count for much. Here we're given a mirror in which to see all of our self-righteous tendencies. Every time that we think we're better or even less than someone else, then recall this parable. It can remind us that we're all equally children of God. It can remind us to recognize the reality of our sinfulness and then place ourselves solely at the mercy of God. Jesus' punchline for this parable was how this scoundrel, who seemed to be the more undeserving of the two, was the one who went down to his home justified. And justification, like a diamond, has more than one facet. To be justified is to be made right with God, with oneself, and with all our neighbors, all 7.75 billion of them. It's being made right with all creation. To be justified is to be whole and at peace in one's own skin. To be justified is to practice shalom in how one lives each day. The Pharisee in this parable wasn't justified because he wasn't in right relationship with his neighbor, the tax collector. So perhaps this parable fits nicely with many other stories we have in Luke's gospel, like the story of Zacchaeus, another tax collector who was transformed, or the one about how a Samaritan was a neighbor to a man who had been robbed and beaten by bandits. It's my hope and prayer that today we can take this parable deeply to heart and let it help us to see who we truly are in the cartoon depictions of our lives. If we can confront our fears that caution us to stay on the surface rather than going over the cliff to explore those deep inner spaces of our lives, if we dare to take the plunge and examine the ways that we're like both of the characters in this parable, then there's a very good chance that Jesus' punchline about who is justified will ring true for us as well. Amen.